I heard them before I saw them. The hushed voices, the awkward pauses when I entered the break room. My name floated in whispers like a currency they were afraid to spend too loudly. 3 years of dedication, countless late nights, and an entire marketing strategy that had tripled our company's growth, all to be rewarded with pity glances and hallway murmurs. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know that I'd already copied every file, every email, every digital breadcrumb that would expose their plan. They wanted to call it burnout when they fired me. Fine, I'd show them what burning really looked like. My name is Alexandra Davis, and this is how I burned Zenith Dynamics to the ground without striking a single match. The first signs appeared 6 months ago. I'd been at Zenith for just over 3 years, climbing from junior marketing strategist to heading my own team in record time. Our CEO, Richard Blackwell, had personally congratulated me on the success of our last campaign, which had brought in 3 major clients worth over $40 million in combined contracts. I had designed the entire strategy myself, staying up until 3 a.m. most nights for weeks, researching market positions, creating customized approaches for each potential client, and coaching my team through perfect pitches. Alexandra, you're the kind of talent that builds empires, Richard had said, his hand heavy on my shoulder at the company celebration. I remember the weight of that hand, the casual ownership it implied. Back then, I'd taken it as a badge of honor. The morning everything changed was deceptively ordinary. April sunshine streamed through the windows of our open-plan office, and I was reviewing the quarterly numbers with satisfaction. My team had outperformed every other division, again. The coffee in my marketing genius mug, a Christmas gift from my team, was still hot when my computer screen flashed with a meeting notification. 11 a.m. Your office, HR and executive discussion. No agenda, no explanation. Just a mandatory meeting that hadn't existed when I'd checked my calendar 30 minutes earlier. Probably another bonus discussion, said Mia, my assistant director, when she noticed my furrowed brow. You've been killing it so hard they need to invent new compensation tiers. I laughed and waved away her flattery. But something cold had settled in my stomach. I'd been in corporate America long enough to know that surprise meetings with HR rarely ended with good news. At precisely 11, Diane from HR appeared at my office door, her face a practiced mask of professional neutrality. Behind her stood Thomas Reed, our COO, and Karen Williams, the newly hired VP of Strategic Development, a position that hadn't existed until 3 months ago. Alexandra, thank you for making time for us, Thomas said, as if I'd had a choice. Of course, I replied, gesturing to the chairs across from my desk. What can I help you with? Diane closed the door before sitting down. Another bad sign. Alexandra, she began, folding her hands neatly in her lap. We wanted to check in with you. The executive team has noticed some concerning patterns in your work lately. I blinked. Concerning patterns? Our numbers are higher than they've ever been. We just landed Arcturus International last week, a client we've been trying to sign for 2 years. Thomas cleared his throat. Yes, the results have been impressive, but we're worried about the process. And frankly, about you. Me. I felt like I'd stepped into some alternate reality where success was suddenly a problem. Karen leaned forward, her expression a study in manufactured concern. You've been working extremely long hours. Your team reports that you're micromanaging projects. Several colleagues have mentioned that you seem intense during meetings. Intense, I repeated. I'm passionate about our work. Is that a problem now? It's not about passion, Diane interjected smoothly. It's about sustainability and company culture. We're concerned you're experiencing burnout. And there it was, the corporate euphemism for you're too much, too driven, too ambitious, too successful. I'd seen it happen to other women at previous companies, the way excellence in men was rewarded while the same qualities in women were pathologized. I appreciate your concern, I said carefully. But I'm fine. My team is thriving, our division is outperforming every projection, and client satisfaction is at an all-time high. Thomas and Karen exchanged a look that made my skin crawl. Alexandra, Thomas said, his voice dropping into what I recognized as his serious business tone. We've decided that it would be best for you and for Zenith if you took some time off. A paid leave of absence to recalibrate. Recalibrate, I echoed. The word hung in the air between us, sterile and insulting. Just for a month, Karen added quickly. We've already arranged for Bradley Harrison to step in and oversee your team temporarily. Bradley Harrison, the marketing director who'd been hired 6 months ago from our competitor, despite having less experience and fewer successful campaigns than junior members of my own team. The man who'd spent more time cultivating relationships with executives than actually producing results. I don't need time off, I stated flatly. And my team doesn't need Bradley's oversight. We're in the middle of developing the strategy for the Meridian project, which I personally secured. Diane's professional smile didn't waver. This isn't really a request, Alexandra. The decision has been made with your best interests in mind. We value you too much to watch you burn yourself out. I sat very still, processing what was happening. This wasn't about my well-being. This was a power play. A way to sideline me while someone else, someone more palatable to the old boys network, took credit for my work and my team. When does this mandatory vacation begin? I asked, my voice remarkably steady despite the rage building behind my ribs. Effective immediately, Thomas replied. Your team will be informed this afternoon. Bradley will meet with them tomorrow morning. I see. I didn't. Not fully. Not yet. But I would. And after this month of recalibration, I returned to my position as before. Another glance between Thomas and Karen, another bad sign. We'll reassess at that time, Karen said. There may be some restructuring of responsibilities to ensure a healthier work-life balance for you. Translation. They were going to strip me of my authority, reassign my projects, and shove me into some meaningless role where I couldn't threaten anyone's fragile ego with my competence. HR will send you the paperwork this afternoon, Diane added, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. Please use this time to truly rest. Alexandra, no checking emails, no calling your team members. A clean break to heal. They filed out of my office, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and corporate betrayal. I sat motionless for several minutes, staring at the wall where my framed achievement awards hung in a neat row. 3 years of my life. Countless hours. My creative energy, my strategic mind, my determination. All of it poured into making Zenith Dynamics a market leader. And this was my reward. I pulled out my phone and texted Mia. Need to talk. Privately. After work. Crucial. Her response came immediately. Your place? I'll bring wine. Then I opened my laptop and began making copies of everything. Every strategy document I'd created. Every email exchange with clients. Every presentation, budget report, and market analysis. I wasn't going down without evidence of what I'd built and what they were taking from me. By 5 p.m., my personal hard drive contained 3 years of proof that Zenith Dynamics' meteoric rise had been engineered largely by me and my team. I signed the HR paperwork with a steady hand, smiled politely as security escorted me out as a standard procedure, and drove home in a state of cold, crystallizing fury. Mia arrived at my apartment at 7 p.m. with 2 bottles of wine and a righteous anger that matched my own after I told her what had happened. This is about the Meridian strategy, she said, pacing my living room with a glass of Cabernet in hand. They're pushing you out so Bradley can take credit for it. Karen's been in his office 3 times this week with the door closed. But why? The strategy isn't even finished. We're still compiling the market research and developing the approach. Mia stopped pacing and gave me a look. Alex, don't be naive. Your preliminary outline already shows it's going to be revolutionary. If it succeeds, when it succeeds, it'll be the biggest innovation in the industry in a decade. Whoever gets credit for it is looking at a career-making moment. She was right, of course. The Meridian project wasn't just another client acquisition. It was a complete reimagining of how companies like ours approached multi-platform marketing integration. I'd been developing the core concepts for over a year, pulling together research from disparate fields and creating something entirely new. "So what are you going to do?" Mia asked, refilling our glasses. I took a slow sip of wine, letting the question settle. "First, I'm going to find out exactly what they're planning. Then I'm going to make sure they regret ever using the word burnout to describe me." The next morning, while Zenith's executives thought I was home, recalibrating, I was setting up an elaborate system of information gathering. Mia became my eyes and ears inside the company, along with 2 other loyal team members who were disgusted by how I'd been treated. I created secure communication channels using encrypted apps, and we established a code system for sharing sensitive information. Within 3 days, I had confirmation of my suspicions. Bradley had indeed taken over the Meridian strategy, presenting my preliminary work as his own developing vision. Worse, Karen was fast-tracking the project, pushing for implementation before the month of my leave was over, ensuring I would have no way to reclaim ownership. What they didn't know was that my strategy, as brilliant as the outline appeared, was deliberately incomplete. I had kept certain critical components in my head, unwritten and unshared. The architecture they were rushing to implement was missing its foundation, built on assumptions that would collapse under real-world application. And collapse it would, spectacularly and publicly, unless they had the missing pieces that only I possessed. A week into my forced absence, I received a call from an unknown number while grocery shopping. "Alexandra Davis?" a woman's crisp voice inquired when I answered. "Yes, who's this?" "Josephine Mercer, CEO of Titanium Partners. I heard you might be available for a conversation about your future. Do you have time for lunch tomorrow?" Titanium Partners was Zenith's largest competitor, a company that had been trying to poach me for the past year with increasingly generous offers, all of which I'd loyally declined. "I'm listening," I replied, abandoning my shopping cart in the middle of the produce section and walking outside to ensure privacy. The lunch meeting with Josephine Mercer was enlightening in more ways than one. Not only was she offering me a position as chief marketing strategist with double my previous salary, but she also shared something that made my blood run cold. "We've been hearing rumors," she said, delicately cutting into her salmon, "that Zenith is preparing to announce a revolutionary marketing integration strategy, something that could change the competitive landscape significantly." I kept my expression neutral. "Is that so?" Josephine nodded. "Apparently, their new marketing director, Bradley, has been quite vocal about his visionary approach in certain industry circles. In fact, I believe he's presenting at the National Marketing Summit next month." The National Marketing Summit, the most prestigious gathering in our industry, where game-changing innovations were unveiled and careers were made. And Bradley was going to present my strategy, my incomplete, fundamentally flawed strategy, as his own. "That's interesting timing," I managed to say. Josephine's smile was knowing. "Yes, I thought you might find it so, especially given that the registration list shows you won't be attending this year, for the first time in your career." After lunch, I accepted Josephine's offer in principle, but asked for 2 weeks before signing the contract. "I have some personal matters to resolve first," I explained. She understood perfectly. In our industry, personal matters often translated to competitive intelligence gathering or strategic leverage creation. Back in my apartment, I laid out everything I knew on a digital whiteboard. Bradley had taken over my Meridian strategy and was presenting it as his own. The strategy, as they understood it, was fundamentally flawed without the components I'd kept to myself. They were fast-tracking implementation and planned to announce it at the National Marketing Summit. Richard, Thomas, and Karen were all supporting this plan, presumably to share in the glory when it succeeded. None of them suspected that I knew what they were doing. The path forward crystallized with perfect clarity. I wouldn't just expose their theft, I would let them hang themselves with it. That evening, I called Mia. I need everything you can get me on the Meridian implementation timeline, I told her. And I need to know exactly what Bradley is changing in my strategy. Already on it, she replied. He's scheduled full team presentations for the next 3 days. I'll record everything. Be careful, I warned. If they catch you, they won't, she interrupted firmly. Half the team is ready to quit over how they treated you. We're all just waiting to see what you're planning. Her loyalty brought a lump to my throat. Thank you. This won't be for nothing, I promise. The next week was a blur of covert information gathering, strategic planning, and careful alliance building. I reconnected with former clients who had followed me to Zenith, former colleagues who had witnessed my rise, and industry journalists who had covered my successful campaigns. Without explicitly stating my intentions, I made sure all the right people knew I was taking some time to consider my options, and that interesting developments would be coming soon from Zenith Dynamics, developments that I suggested they might want to watch closely. Meanwhile, Mia and my loyal team members fed me daily updates on the Meridian strategy implementation. As I'd predicted, Bradley was struggling with the gaps in the framework. He was making critical errors that would doom the strategy to failure, but his arrogance prevented him from seeing the flaws. Karen, eager to prove her own value to the company, was pushing the project forward despite warning signs that should have been obvious to anyone with real marketing experience. 16 days into my leave of absence, I received the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Mia texted me a photo of a company-wide email announcing that Zenith would be hosting a special pre-summit reception for industry leaders to preview their revolutionary new marketing integration approach. The event would take place 1 week before the National Marketing Summit, with all major clients and industry press invited. They were going to reveal my strategy, broken, incomplete, and doomed to fail, to the entire industry before they even presented it at the summit. Their arrogance was going to be their undoing. I immediately called Josephine Mercer. I'm ready to sign that contract, I told her. But first, I need a favor. 2 days before Zenith's preview reception, I finalized my plan. The contract with Titanium Partners was signed, with a start date set for the day after the National Marketing Summit. Josephine had arranged for me to attend the summit as part of Titanium's delegation, complete with full access credentials and a seat at the main presentation hall, where Bradley would be unveiling his revolutionary strategy. But first, there was Zenith's preview reception to attend to. Are you sure about this? Mia asked during our final planning session in my apartment. Once you do this, there's no going back. I looked at the evidence we'd compiled, screenshots of my original strategy documents with their creation dates, emails discussing the development process, testimonials from team members confirming my authorship, recordings of meetings where Bradley struggled to explain concepts I'd developed, and most damning of all, the fatal flaws in their implementation that would become apparent as soon as they launched. I'm sure, I said. They didn't just steal my work, they tried to steal my future. They deserve what's coming. The night of the reception, I dressed with meticulous care, a sleek black dress that radiated confidence, subtle jewelry that spoke of success, and the calm demeanor of someone who knew exactly how the evening would unfold. I arrived fashionably late, ensuring that most of the guests, including Zenith's executive team and all the important industry figures, would already be present. As I handed my invitation, secured through Josephine's industry connections, to the hostess, I savored the momentary confusion on her face. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be at home, burned out and defeated. Alexandra Davis, I stated clearly, making sure my name carried to those nearby. I believe I'm expected. The hostess checked her list, found the name Josephine had arranged to add, and smiled professionally. Of course, Miss Davis. Welcome. The room seemed to still as I entered. Conversations paused, heads turned. I spotted Richard Blackwell nearly choking on his champagne when he saw me. Thomas Reed's face paled. Karen Williams froze mid-gesture, her practiced smile slipping for just a moment before she recovered. And Bradley Harrison, the man who had stolen my work, stared at me with undisguised panic in his eyes. I smiled and moved through the crowd, accepting greetings from clients who were delighted to see me, shaking hands with industry peers who expressed surprise at my presence. I wouldn't miss this for the world, I told each of them. Tonight promises to be illuminating. Richard reached me first, his CEO smile firmly in place but strain evident around his eyes. Alexandra, he said, voice lowered. This is unexpected. I thought you were taking time to recover. I recovered remarkably quickly, I replied pleasantly, especially once I understood the nature of my ailment. His smile tightened. We should talk privately. Oh, but the presentation is about to begin. I gestured to where Bradley was being ushered to the small stage at the front of the room. I'm particularly interested in hearing about this revolutionary new strategy, the one being unveiled tonight. Richard's eyes narrowed fractionally. Alexandra. Later. Richard, I said, moving past him toward the front of the room. I wouldn't want to miss a word. I positioned myself where Bradley couldn't avoid seeing me, surrounded by representatives from Zenith's most important clients. The room quieted as he took the stage, fumbling slightly with his notes I knew contained concepts he didn't fully understand. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice betraying a slight tremor. Thank you for joining us tonight for this exclusive preview of what we at Zenith Dynamics believe will revolutionize marketing integration as we know it. As Bradley launched into his presentation, my presentation, I watched the faces of the clients around me. Initial interest gave way to confusion as he struggled to articulate the core concepts. The fatal flaws in the implementation became increasingly apparent as he detailed the execution plan, full of gaps where my unshared knowledge should have been. I waited until he reached the section on projected outcomes, where the disconnects were most glaring, before raising my hand. Yes? Bradley acknowledged me reluctantly, sweat now visible on his forehead. You have a question? Not a question, I replied, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. More of an observation. Your projected conversion rates seem optimistic, given the implementation framework you've outlined. A murmur went through the crowd. Bradley's face flushed. I assure you, our projections are based on solid research, he stammered. Interesting, I said. Because the cross-platform integration model you're describing is missing several critical components that would make those numbers achievable. Without those components, this strategy will actually decrease conversion rates by approximately 40% in the first quarter of implementation. The murmur grew louder. I could see Thomas and Karen exchanging panicked looks at the back of the room. That's simply not true, Bradley protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I turned to address the room. The strategy being presented tonight originated in my department at Zenith Dynamics before I was placed on leave. What you're hearing is an incomplete version that omits crucial elements necessary for success. Richard moved quickly to the stage, putting a hand on Bradley's shoulder. Perhaps we should take a short break before continuing, he suggested, his CEO smile strained to breaking point. Why? I asked innocently. I'm simply providing context for what's being presented. In fact, I reached into my clutch and removed a small USB drive. I have the complete strategy right here, with documentation showing its development under my direction over the past year. The room erupted in whispers. Client representatives were exchanging concerned glances. Industry journalists who had been invited to cover the revolutionary announcement were suddenly much more interested in the drama unfolding before them. Alexandra, Richard said, his voice hardening as he stepped toward me. This is highly unprofessional. Is it? I replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. More unprofessional than taking credit for someone else's work? More unprofessional than pushing out the person who developed this strategy under the guise of burnout so others could claim it as their own? Complete silence fell over the room. I had everyone's attention now, especially the journalists. Ladies and gentlemen, I continued, addressing the crowd directly. I apologize for this disruption, but I felt it necessary to set the record straight. The strategy being presented tonight was indeed developed at Zenith Dynamics by me and my team. However, What you're hearing is fundamentally flawed due to incomplete understanding of the framework. Any company implementing this strategy as described would face significant market share losses within 6 months. I turned back to Richard, whose face had gone from flushed to ashen. Of course, I'd be happy to discuss this privately with Zenith's executive team, perhaps during that reassessment you scheduled for the end of my leave. The reception dissolved into chaos after that. Clients demanded explanations. Journalists circled like sharks, sensing blood in the water. The Zenith executives tried desperately to regain control of the narrative, but the damage was done. I slipped out during the confusion, leaving behind the USB drive, which contained irrefutable evidence of my authorship and the strategy's development timeline. By morning, the story would be all over the industry news. Zenith Dynamics caught attempting to pass off stolen work as innovation, while the true architect of the strategy had been pushed out under questionable circumstances. But that was only phase 1 of my plan. The week between the disastrous reception and the National Marketing Summit was a whirlwind of activity. As I'd anticipated, industry publications ran with the story of Zenith's appropriation of my work. Clients began calling me directly, concerned about the strategies I developed for them while at Zenith. And my phone rang constantly with interview requests from business journalists eager to hear my side of the story. I gave exactly one interview, to the most respected publication in our industry, where I calmly and factually laid out what had happened, backed by the evidence I'd gathered. I was careful not to seem vindictive or emotional, presenting myself as a professional who simply wanted recognition for her work and concern for clients who might implement a flawed strategy. The fallout for Zenith was immediate and severe. Their stock dropped 15% in 3 days. 2 major clients announced they were reviewing their relationship with the company. The National Marketing Summit Committee was reconsidering Bradley's presentation slot, concerned about the controversy. Richard Blackwell finally called me 4 days after the reception. "This has gone far enough, Alexandra," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You've made your point." "Have I?" I asked calmly. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you still don't understand what you did wrong." "We can fix this," he said, changing tactics. "Come back to Zenith, full reinstatement, promotion to VP level, substantial compensation adjustment. We'll issue a public clarification about your role in developing the strategy." "That's a generous offer," I replied, "but I've already accepted a position elsewhere." Silence on the line. Then, "Titanium Partners." "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "What do you want, Alexandra? To destroy everything we've built?" "Because that's what will happen if this continues. The Meridian strategy is fundamentally flawed in its current form," I finished for him, "and will fail catastrophically if implemented as Bradley has designed it." "Then help us fix it," he urged. "Come back, take control of the project again. Name your price." "It's not about the money, Richard. It's about integrity and recognition. It's about not sidelining people who excel because their success makes others uncomfortable." "What do you want?" he repeated, desperation now evident in his voice. What I wanted was for them to feel the same sense of betrayal and powerlessness that I had felt sitting in my office that day. What I wanted was for them to understand that my burnout had been their convenient excuse for a power play that had backfired spectacularly. But what I said was, I want the truth to be acknowledged, publicly and completely. The day before the National Marketing Summit, Zenith Dynamics issued a press release that sent shockwaves through the industry. They announced a strategic restructuring of their executive team. Thomas Reed was stepping down as COO. Karen Williams was returning to her previous company, and Bradley Harrison was pursuing other opportunities. The release specifically credited me as the principal architect of their marketing integration strategy and expressed regret for miscommunications regarding leadership transitions. It was as close to a public apology as a company like Zenith could manage without admitting legal liability. The stock price stabilized. Clients who had been wavering decided to stay, for now. And my reputation in the industry soared as the woman who had stood up to corporate theft of intellectual property and won. But I wasn't finished yet. The morning of the summit, I met with Josephine Mercer in her hotel suite to finalize our plan. Zenith's presentation slot hasn't been canceled, she informed me. Richard will be presenting himself, now that Bradley is gone. Perfect, I smiled. And our counter presentation is ready. Josephine nodded, a predatory gleam in her eye. Exactly as you specified, the moment Richard finishes revealing their flawed strategy, you'll take the stage in our slot immediately after and demonstrate the correct implementation, with proprietary enhancements developed under your new role at Titanium. And the client representatives, all confirmed. They'll be in the front row to witness both presentations back to back. By the end of the day, we'll have poached at least 3 of Zenith's major accounts. I nodded, satisfaction settling into my bones. Then let's finish this. The summit's main presentation hall was packed when Richard Blackwell took the stage. I sat in the Titanium Partners section, surrounded by my new colleagues, watching as he attempted to salvage what remained of Zenith's reputation and the strategy that had been meant to secure their market dominance. His presentation was professional, but lacked conviction. He outlined the strategy much as Bradley had, with some corrections based on the feedback from the disastrous reception, but still missing the critical components that only I fully understood. The client representatives in the audience looked uncertain, some taking notes with furrowed brows. When Richard finished, the applause was polite but restrained. He looked exhausted as he left the stage, avoiding eye contact with the Titanium section where I sat. The moderator returned to the microphone. Our next presentation is from Titanium Partners, introducing their new chief marketing strategist with a demonstration of their enhanced cross-platform integration approach. As I walked to the stage, I caught Richard's eye from where he now sat in the audience. For a brief moment, I saw recognition dawn on his face as he realized what was about to happen. Good morning, I began, my voice steady and confident. I'm Alexandra Davis, Chief Marketing Strategist at Titanium Partners. Today, I'll be demonstrating our comprehensive approach to cross-platform marketing integration, one that addresses the critical gaps in implementation that my colleague just outlined. For the next 30 minutes, I presented the complete, corrected version of my strategy, enhanced with new elements I developed specifically for Titanium. I demonstrated exactly where Zenith's approach would fail and how Titanium's implementation solved those problems. I showed projected outcomes backed by robust data and clear methodological frameworks. The audience was rapt. The client representatives were taking furious notes. And when I finished, the applause was thunderous. As I returned to my seat beside Josephine, she leaned over and whispered, "Richard Blackwell just left the hall. He looked like he might be physically ill." "Good," I replied quietly. "He's finally experiencing some burnout of his own." By the end of the summit, 3 of Zenith's major clients had approached Titanium about transferring their accounts. 2 more requested meetings the following week. Industry analysts were already predicting a major shift in market share over the coming quarter. On my first official day at Titanium Partners, I arrived to find my new office decorated with a custom nameplate, Alexandra Davis, Chief Marketing Strategist, Exit on Fire. Josephine greeted me with a glass of champagne. "To new beginnings," she toasted. "And to the woman who brought us Zenith's market share on a silver platter." I smiled and raised my glass. They should have known better than to diagnose me with burnout. "Their mistake," Josephine agreed. "Our gain." That afternoon, I received a text from Mia. "Half the marketing department just resigned from Zenith. We're waiting for your call, ready when you are." I forwarded the message to Josephine, who immediately authorized me to hire the entire team. 6 months later, Zenith Dynamics announced another restructuring, this time a 30% reduction in workforce following the loss of 5 major clients and a 45% drop in stock value. Richard Blackwell stepped down as CEO, citing personal reasons. The Wall Street Journal ran a feature article titled "The Davis Effect: How One Woman's Exit Burned Down a Corporate Strategy." It detailed the rise of Titanium Partners under my leadership and the corresponding collapse of Zenith Dynamics following my departure. The article ended with a quote from an anonymous former Zenith executive. "We thought she was burning out, Instead, she was just warming up. I cut out that quote and framed it, hanging it on the wall of my corner office at Titanium's headquarters. Every morning when I arrived at work, I looked at it and smiled. They had fired me for burnout. I had burned their whole strategy to ashes. And from those ashes, I had risen, stronger, more powerful, and with an unassailable reputation as the woman who couldn't be silenced, sidelined, or stolen from. My name is Alexandra Davis. And that is how I set Zenith Dynamics on fire without striking a single match.